All right, welcome to Fruitland Christian Fellowship. We are just happy to have everybody here, Lord, that we can just be a blessing through the Word of God and through the will of God, that we be able to bless you with the Word and share a little bit of a relationship building teachings between you and God. So we just want to thank you for tuning in, if anybody's tuning in, and just, of course, everyone that's here in our church today. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about a person named Gideon, and Gideon the book of Judges is very interesting book, because if you guys have ever read the book of Judges, it kind of starts off where, you know, as it's moving out of Joshua in the Old Testament, and it's moving out of these great things that God is doing, and then you kind of see this downturn that happens through the book of Judges, and then it leads back up to David, and then it goes up and down. The interesting thing about the Bible is that, and the story of Gideon, is that whenever you hear about Gideon, you always hear that, you know, he was really weak, and then he became strong and had this awesome victory. But the end is kind of left off, because as human beings, we have this tendency to, we want a hero. We almost want somebody to worship in a way. We're always looking for somebody to believe in, somebody to save us, these type of stories, these type of people that we're looking up to. We're always looking for that. As human, it's natural that we're looking for some sort of, almost, it's an idol. You know, you look at all of our movies and all of our books, right? There's this protagonist against an antagonist. There's this hero that's always downtrodden. There's always, even in kids' movies, there's always some sort of suffering or traumatic scene in the beginning. Every kids' movie, there's always a family member lost. Something happens that's really bad in the beginning. Every adult movie, it's always something bad that's happened in the beginning. And then out of those ashes, right, out of that burn, then a hero kind of arises. And then in the end, it's this blaze of glory, and everybody's happy. All right, that is a type of storytelling that comes from Greek culture. That is Greek storytelling. About, you know, you think about their gods that they worship, their pagan gods, and the way that they portray them, and there's always something really bad happens, and in the end there's a big win, there's a big windfall, and all the superhero movies that you think about, and we love that. As human beings, we love seeing that, and we love kind of putting ourselves in those kind of characters. And so the thing about the Bible is the Bible's different. The Bible doesn't tell stories like that. The reason why the Bible doesn't tell stories like that, and God didn't put stories into His prophets and the people that He raises up, is because He doesn't want us to create idols. Because all of these men and women and these people in the Bible need to be pointing towards God. We're not glorifying the people, we're glorifying God. And so throughout the Bible, you see what happens is it's kind of the same type of arc. He takes the lowest of the low people, and He brings them up. And He raises them up, and they're these great conquerors, these great leaders. But then what happens? They fall. All of them fall. Every single one of them, right? They're torn down. Even Jesus, right? He's torn down. He's put up on a cross, but then He's raised up. He's the only one in the whole Bible that in the end is like this great thing happened. Because you think about Moses, right? What was his downturn? He couldn't even make it to the promised land, right? You think about all the judges. They have these great battles, but it always ends in ruin. It goes back to the same. You think about David. He started out with nothing. He was the lowest of the low. He was brought up, and he was this great king. And what happened in the end? His family fell apart. Israel got separated. Solomon, same thing. All of these people inside the Bible, they're all being torn down. Why? Because for one, they seem to bask in the glory, and they seem to stop pointing everybody towards God, and they start taking on a little glory themselves. Or the world seems to just take back over. Because why? Because we need to not be looking to men to save us. We need to be looking to God to save us. We need to be looking for God. And that's why the Bible's different, because there's not these superhero stories, because all of these stories are just faulty men that we can look at because we don't create an idol out of them, and then we point towards God. And Judges are the same. So we always hear about this great story of Gideon, but we never hear about his compromise in the end and what kind of happens there. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We got a lot to go through today. I don't even know if we're going to make it, but we're going to try to make it. So so we'll just start with a prayer as we should. Father, we just thank you for today. Lord, you are a great God. Lord, you deserve all the glory. I pray in the name of Jesus that you help us just totally just open our mind to you and you alone, Lord. As the world comes in, the enemy comes in, tries to tear us down, try to put roadblocks in our lives. I just pray in the name of Jesus that you would just stop that. I pray that we can stay diligent to your word, to understand your word better, that we can have a better relationship with you. We just praise you for this. We thank you. We love you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So the book of Judges, we're going to be in Judges 6. And so the book of Judges is a very tragic book. If you guys, especially towards the end, remember it starts off kind of, a little rocky on top, but there's like these great battles. Then in the end, it's just, it's not child friendly. In the last chapters of the book of Judges. And remember, the book of Judges is because Israel didn't have a king. That wasn't ever God's plan for Israel to have a king. It was never the plan. And so Israel, they're clamoring for a king. They're saying, we want a king, we want a king. And so he's like, okay, well, Samuel comes and he goes, if you guys want a king, then you guys can have a king. But this king is going to take a portion of everything that you have, and he's going to be over you, and it's not always going to be good. They're like, we don't care. We want a king because we want to be like the other nations. So they gave him a king, right? Gave him Saul. Saul turned into David. And there was just this ruin of ups and downs, because God says, you don't need a king. You just need to be following me. I will be your king. But the people wanted somebody to worship. Just like today, like I was telling you, we're always looking for somebody to save us, somebody to help us, and yet we have God up there. Even in our politics, right? It's always the next politician. He's going to save us. Oh, he's going to save it. He's going to save us from the corrupt. Oh, I need to vote on him. I don't care if he's evil. I don't care if he's not a Christian. I'm going to sign off on him. That's why I'm not big on that. I'm not big on politics because I can't sign off on corrupt men. I can't put my name to it. I just can't. That's not who I am. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm going to let God handle it. I'm going to let God figure it out. Some people will say that's irresponsible. Well, that's fine, because my responsibility is to God. And who I sign off to has to be a godly person. And who we are getting put is not godly people. Who's being put in front of us are not godly people. They're just not. And so we're always looking for somebody to save us. Oh, it's the next one. He's going to save us. He's going to save us. We need to watch the news and know more about it so people can save us. But God's saying, no, we don't need people to save us. And that's why in the book of Judges, this was before the king. This was whenever all there was these leaders, these small regional groups, and they were the judges of Israel. And then they were the ones that God kind of worked through. And so we're going to be starting Gideon. And so Gideon is things were okay in the beginning with Ehud, and then you have Deborah and Othniel. You have those three judges in the beginning. Things aren't too bad with that. Things are all right. They're battling. They're still under different countries under their thumb and their oppression. And then Gideon comes and things are looking pretty good, and then it just starts going down and worse and worse and worse. But Gideon, it's okay. The story's okay. Okay, so what we're going to talk is the Midianites. So the thing about the Midianites, when we start in Judges 6, 1 through 6, we're going to be reading a lot today. And so we're going to be in Judges 6, 1 through 6. And I want to talk a little bit about the Midianites. So because the people of God turned away from God, right, their king, God, they turned away from him, then what happens when you turn your life? What happens when you turn your life away from God? What happens? It always gets bad, right? It always gets bad. You can think about it when you were close to God. I'm not saying that everything is easy when you're close to God. I'm just saying you can handle it a lot better. You're prepared for it. You're prepared for the fire that's coming because you're in the hand of God, and you operate better in it spiritually because you're spiritually concrete on the rock, right? You're built on the rock. But as soon as you're off the rock, as soon as you're away from God, then your house, it gets just torn away. And so the same thing with Israel is that what happened is in the Midianites, they started taking on religion of the Midianites. They started taking on the religion of the Canaanites, all going back to Samaria. There's a lot of Baal worship, Asherah worship. There's these different gods that the Bible says whoring after. Because we're in a relationship, right, with God. We're in a relationship with him, so when we go worship other gods, God calls it whoring after, because you are being, you're not being faithful to God. You're going somewhere else. And so the Midianites is actually, they're people that come from Midian, who is Abraham and Keturah, his wife. After Sarah died, he had a son named Gideon. He had a lot more sons, but a son named Gideon, and those are the Midianites, right? And that wasn't some that, obviously, if this is the people that came out of it, then maybe that wasn't a relationship that God wanted to bless, but Abraham did it anyways. It's just the way things worked out. And so it is very interesting that the decisions that we make today, and just as the decisions that Abraham made when he lived, there was big outcomes, good and bad, that happened for it. If it was something that was ordained by God, God blessed it. If it's something that wasn't ordained by God, it was cursed because it wasn't of the will of God. And it goes the same for you all and me, is that any decision we make really affects our generations after. We don't even know. We don't even understand. And so we really need to think about the way we live our life and the decisions that we make following the will of God or not. It's because we're not just affecting ourselves, but we're affecting our descendants of our descendants of our descendants. So these are things that we need to be thinking about, and not living selfishly because I want to do it, but be thinking more about down the line. You know, who does this affect? Whose family does this affect? And so we need to make good decisions. So, like I said, we got a lot to read here. So the Midianites, it goes, the people of Israel, Judges 6:1, the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years, and the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. So all these marauders, they would come up against them. And the Midianites, they were tied also, the people of the east were tied to the Ishmaelites. They would encamp, they would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. So as far as Gaza, meaning all the way up to the sea. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels would not be counted. That's how many would come, and they take everything from like God's people. Why? Because they did, go back to 1, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the only reason this was happening. It's because they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the only reason this happened. And so when they fallen away from the Lord, then God's like, all right, well then this is what you get. For they would come up with, let me see here, 6. And Israel was brought low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord. So then they finally cried out for help. All right, well, I'm going to do this. Okay. So 7, when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet to the people of Israel. And he said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice. And so it's interesting, you kind of hear like, oh, Samuel was the first prophet, and it's like, it's not really, God had a lot of prophets, this one is unnamed. And so he sends his prophet, he reminds them like, hey, I brought you out of this. I've been here for you this whole time. And he goes here, but you, on the 10, it goes, but you have not obeyed my voice. He's like, all this is happening because you have not obeyed my voice. You have not been living in the will that I have for you. God said he has great things, right? A place of milk and honey, this awesome land that they can prosper. But what do? They turn away from God and they start worshiping the gods of the land, of the Canaanites. Okay, so 11. Now the angel of the Lord came, and a theophany, Christophany, God incarnate, that some say, some don't say. Either way, just the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Bezerite, while the son of Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So Gideon's hiding. He's hiding in the winepress, and he's beating out the wheat. He's threshing the wheat. He's getting it ready to be able to use. And so the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. So God had a name for him, and at this time Gideon was not a man of valor. But God doesn't see who you think you are. He sees who he made you to be. Right? That's who God sees you for who he created you and the will that he has for you. Because that's the truth. What happens is that we create a character of ourselves, and when we let people and our own thoughts sway who we think we are, right? This is what leads to suicide. This is what leads to depression. This is what leads to hopelessness. This is the type of thinking that you're allowing what other people say you are. You're allowing what your mind is telling you, the enemy is telling you who you are, and you're forgetting about how special God made you, how amazing God made you, and the will that he has for your life that we haven't stepped into yet, and he's just waiting for us to do that. So then God, he claims over him, right? He blesses him he says, O mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? So Gideon is seeing what the world is portraying to him. He's not hearing what God is telling him. And he goes, and where? So that's why I call it Gideon the coward, because this is where he starts as a coward. And where all of his wonderful deeds that our father recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. So it's 6:14. And the Lord turned to him and said, Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you? He's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna send you. You're gonna go and save Midian. After he was like, man, we're in a bad place, God. You haven't pulled us out. You haven't saved us. God's like, yeah, that's why I'm here. You're going to go do it. And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And so he goes, I'm nothing. He says, I'm from the smallest clan, the half clan Manasseh, right? Manasseh and Ephraim. He says, I'm from the half clan Manasseh. I am the least, I'm the very least in my Father's house. He's like, there's no way I can do this, right? Because remember, he's applying his own thoughts of who he thinks he is, and he's not believing what God says. Really, ultimately calling God a liar, which we do all the time, right? Oh, I can't do that, God. I can't do that. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay till you return. The interesting thing about Gideon is it seems that Gideon is the only one that has fallen the Lord in his own father's house, and which we're going to see what happens a little bit earlier. So 19. So Gideon went into the house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and he brought them to him under the terebinth tree, and presented them. So remember, he went inside and he had to get all this ready. He had to, kill the goat, get the cakes. He did all of these things, prepare for an offering. He did all of this. And so the angel of the Lord was probably sitting out there for, I don't know, maybe a couple hours. And the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock and pour the broth over them. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes. And fire sprang up out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes, and the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. So he wanted a sign. He brought an offering, right, for the sign, and then the angel of the Lord, boom, boom, boom. And he's like, okay, now I know this is God. And now he's probably freaking out because God told him to go deliver the people, and he's like, oh no, now I know I have to do it. So now he's really worried. Then Gideon perceived, this 6:22, that Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. He's like, oh no, I seen the angel of the Lord. This is where we go with theophany. He's like, he's worried because he said, oh, I seen God, I seen the angel of the Lord face to face. And then also it could be, he's like, oh, now I have to go do this. But the Lord said to him, so he vanished, and the Lord said to him, came back, he says, peace be to you. He says, don't worry, do not fear, you shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, the Lord is peace. To this day it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull, and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it. So his father, he has an altar to Baal, right? This is the Canaanite god. It means Lord, and so it's the altar. It's the altar of God. It's Baal, and then he has, and it usually comes with an Asherah. An Asherah is a wooden pole that the Israelites, so they're following these other gods, and it's very interesting because Israel keeps falling back to Baal worship, right? This is coming into child sacrifice. This is coming into some really weird stuff. And so the Asherah pole that's beside it, and you can look up, there is a Asherah and the tree of life. And in Judaism today, especially in Kabbalah, the tree of life is a very prominent theological symbol. And Asherah is tied to the tree of life. And so, and Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. And today, right? Today, if you're not following Jesus, you're not following God. And what does Israel always seem to do? Israel always seems to fall back into worship of other gods and trying to mix God and these other gods, because what they would do is they would try to marry God to Asherah, Because in the Canaanite culture, you had El, he was the ultimate god, they'd call him El, and then you would have Asherah, the wife. The son would be Baal or Baal. And so however you say that, they would always take Asherah and they would try to marry Asherah to God. That's what they would try to do. And so there was all this weird stuff that would happen inside the ancient Hebrew culture that God was always against. And so that inside Gideon's family, there was an altar to Baal, and there was the altar and the pole of Asherah that sat down beside it. So God says, hey, go cut that down. Go cut down that altar of Baal and build an altar to your Lord God on top of the stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. And so this is where some people say, oh, he was a coward because he was too scared and he had to do it at night. This is where he's starting to become a conqueror, because he still did it, right? He still did it. He was worried, but he's like, maybe it's better to do this at night. We're just going to do this at night. And he didn't say no, right? And he's moving into being a conqueror, because here he was a coward, and he was like, oh no, I'm worried about it. Here he's becoming a conqueror. Here he's becoming a conqueror. Why? Because not because of anything he's doing, but because of who God is. And he's listening to God. He's listening to the will of God. And so he goes in and he said, I'm going to do it by night. I'm going to tear down this altar and I'm going to cut down this Asherah pole. When the men of town rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down and the Asherah beside it was cut down. And the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. And so it was cut down. He did everything that God told him to do, right? He's becoming this conqueror. He's being built up. He's starting to listen to God. And they said to one another, who has done this? So the people, they're like, who has done this? And after they had searched and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the town said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die. For he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. And so these men of Israel, right, that they're whoring after other gods. And what's happened? Now they want to kill him because now he cut down another god's altar because he's doing what God has done. Let's see what happens. God has told him to do. So this is his dad. This was his dad's altar. This was on his dad's property, and this was his dad, his Asherah pole. And so let's see what Joash's dad, let's see what his dad said. But Joash said to all who stood against him, God's working on his dad's heart too, right? Because God's in this whole thing. He says, I'm not going to let you die, Gideon. Will you contend for Baal? He's like, will you contend for Baal or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. Therefore, on the day Gideon was called Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he broke down his altar. So his dad, right? Obviously, God was working on his dad, and he tells the people, he goes, let Baal handle it himself. If he is such a great God, let him handle it himself. Let him come and kill Gideon. And it kind of reminds you of what happened some years later, right, with Elijah, right, and what happened with him. And he went up and he was making fun of all the prophets of Baal, and and they built the two altars, and he dumped water on his, and then they had to light that on fire. Baal had to light his altar on fire, so they were whipping themselves, all the priests. And he goes, hey, maybe he's going to the restroom. Maybe he's out there. Maybe he has something better to do. He'll come, and he's making fun of him. It kind of reminds you of that here. He's probably talking back to what Joash did. And so he was called Jerubbaal, and Gideon, they started calling him Jerubbaal. That means let Baal contend against him, meaning he was against Baal. He contended with Baal because he broke down the altar. Judges 6:33 through 35. Because now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east, they came together. Remember, this wasn't just like one people. This was like a group of marauders of different people that would come to give a bad problem and to steal from God's people, or the people that were supposed to be God's people, but they were worshiping other gods, obviously. And they crossed the Jordan and he camped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Bezerites were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali, and they went up to meet him. So these are those northern tribes. He sent messengers all out there, because what he did when he broke down this altar, he made a name for himself. And when he made a name for himself, then people started following him, and God was creating, he was building up this man for his will in order to do this great thing, to deliver his people. Why? Because his people were called out for help for him, help to God. And so he sends out messengers, and they gather all these men. Why? Because they're going to battle the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people from the east that are in the valley of Jezreel. 36. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on the ground let there be dew." And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and on the ground there was dew. And so a lot of this called, your fleece, was it testing the fleece? And so what is happening here is that he's asking God for a sign. And a lot of people really, they say, "Oh, well, Gideon shouldn't have done this. He wasn't really following God. He shouldn't have done this." They call this kind of a cowardice act too. But this happened many times of like, well, let's see what God says again. Let's double check this. And so this isn't, I don't see too much wrong with this. It's not something that you should do, but in this story, I don't see that it's that bad where some people would call out that it is. But he did it twice. And he even knew twice was probably pushing it, because he already seen a miraculous thing, right? He had this fleece. You kind of think of it like if you had a blanket. And then you put the blanket out, and he said, hey, make sure that the ground is dry and that the blanket is all wet in the morning. And so he goes out, and the blanket's wet, but the ground's completely dry. It's a miraculous thing. And then he goes, well, hey, make sure that the fleece is dry and the ground is wet. And then he's like, okay, I guess this is a God thing. This is from God. So then Zerubbabel, right, because he contended against Baal, that is Gideon. So we go to Judges 7. So he kind of figured out, okay, this is my plan. This is what God has for me. I'm going to go ahead and do this. Remember, he's made a name for himself. He's becoming this conqueror. How? Because of God. Because God is taking him, and he's bowing to the will of God, and he's moving forward to do the will of God to save the people. And all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. I'm going to show you a map. We're going to be able to see a map, and hopefully you can see it on the screen, but I'm going to have a map so then you can kind of have a better idea of where it's at in a physical location. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands. Lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.' Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, 'Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead.' The 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained." So at this time, Gideon has gathered 32,000 people, 32,000 men to go fight against I think it was 132,000 people, 130,000. It'll say there, or did it say? Not yet. And so he gathered all these men, and so then God was like, okay, you gathered all these men, but there's too many people. There's too many men, because if you win this battle, then everyone's just going to say, oh, we did it, and they're going to forget about God. God needs to make it miraculous. God needs to make this miraculous thing happen. In order to, why? Because then glory can go to God, and it can't be taken by men. And so he tells them, hey, let the people that are scared, let them go home. So 22,000 men left, and there was only 10,000 people remaining. 10,000 warriors remaining. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. So there's 10,000 against 130,000. It's still too many. It says the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And if any one of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And any one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go with you. So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink, and likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people knelt down to drink the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with 300 men who lapped, I will say to you, I save you and give the Midianites into your hands, and let all the others go, every man to his home. So that people took provisions in their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent. He retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So this is very interesting, right? They go down to the water, and there's all these 10,000 men. They go to drink, and Gideon's watching them. And so there's two different, theologians kind of argue which set of men did he take. Because those men that went down to the bottom, and then they kind of just drank the water, like right out the water. And then there was other men that stood up, and they would bring it with their hand, and maybe you'd see it. That's how you see it in Sunday school. They're holding their staff, and then they bring the water themselves, and they were staying vigilant, and they were trying to watch. Now some say that because of the way it's written, it's not written very. You could go both ways. When you look back in Hebrew, you can kind of go both ways. And some will say that the people that were watchful, that they were trying to watch and they were drinking the water, those are who God took. The other men that just got down and they weren't even worried about who was coming, they weren't watchful, and then they were lapping up. Some say that they were the ones that took. I personally believe that He's taking the worst of the worst. The people that are not care, they're just down, they don't care, they're not being vigilant, they're not watching, they're not worried, they're just drinking. It's kind of like He takes these 300 men that everyone would be like, there is no way that those 300 men destroyed this giant army. Because God's bringing all the glory back to Himself. And so you'll read in those books, they try to make it like very honorable, like the guys that were watching, that's who God took. But I don't know. I kind of side with, I think that He really took the guys that were just like, they were just the crazy guys. They're like, no, God would never use them. But He does. He uses them. He takes the lowest of the low and He brings them up, right? And so then all the glory can be pointed towards God. All right, because He needs people. He doesn't need people to worship Him, but if you follow God and you follow the will that He has for you, He's worthy of worship because He's holy. And so they get all the men and they get them all. They got these 300 guys. And then all the Midianites, the Amalekites, the people of the east, they're down lower in the valley. So that same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp. We got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to rush through this. Like I said, I want to get through this whole thing for you all. Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant. And you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So right, he goes down with his servant. They go sneak into the camp. Then he went down with Purah. This is 11. Then he went down with Purah's servant to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance, and their camels were without number, and the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. So you got to think, though, these are different groups of people. It's not one army, like with one sigil, with one set of clothes. These are all different men, so it's probably easy for him to walk into the camp. It was not a problem because there was so many different people there. There was so many different tribes there, the people of the east. So he snuck down there, and God's like, I want you to go down there, and I want you to listen. So 7:13. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I had dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell, and it turned upside down, so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. So Gideon goes down there, and he's listening in to these two men. And so these two men, what he's saying here, he goes, 13, right? Behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley. So this barley bread, this cake of barley that tumbled in the camp and flattened the tents where they were staying, barley bread was a representation of Israel. Israel, why is barley bread a representation of Israel? Because barley bread is the cheapest of the cheapest bread. It's the easiest to make. It's the worst. It's not wheat. It's like the worst bread. It's barley bread. It'd be like me saying, if I had a dream and I'm like, I seen some ramen noodles roll down in the tent and it's crap. It'd be like that. Just like this ghetto food. And so he says, I seen this barley bread, meaning Israel, because they were poor and they were taking everything. This is the barley bread. And so he goes here, and then his comrade says, this has to be Gideon. So they know of Gideon. Gideon's made a name for himself. And so the son of Joash, a man of Israel, God has given into his hand Midian and all his camp. So then he has this prophetic dream, and then it is interpreted too. As soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped. So he's listening. He's like, all right, this is true. God is doing something. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. And he divided the 300 men, remember 300 men, into 3 companies and put trumpets into their hands, and all of them in empty jars with torches inside the jars. And they say they have the torches inside the jars because it's just an ember, it's kind of smoking. But as soon as you break the jar, the oxygen hits it, and it takes up in big giant flames. So 17, and he said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, and I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So they had this plan. They're going to do a surprise. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. And they had just set the watch. And so this is somewhere between midnight and 2, somewhere in there, midnight and 3. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. So they had their trumpets. They're all blowing it all at once. They smashed the jars. They were just embers. And then they all blow up. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpet. They broke the jars. They held in their hands. Their left hands, the torches, and in the right hands, the trumpets to blow. That's all they have. They don't have swords or nothing. They have a torch and they have a trumpet. And they cried out, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out and fled. Remember, this one guy had this dream. He had this dream, so this rumor was spreading, and I bet you there was other guys in this camp that had this dream. So there's already a rumor spreading that they're going to lose, that Gideon is going to come, he's going to win. And so they're yelling out, for the Lord and for Gideon. So they know it's Gideon attacking. People are having these prophetic dreams. There's all these different armies in there, these different people. They look different. They're from different tribes. So they don't know who's who. There's over 100,000 men. So you'd think all of this chaos, it's like a tinderbox. What happens? They just start fighting each other. Because they don't know over 100,000 men, every single one of them. And so when they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Bethshittah toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabitha. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all of Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. So they all start killing each other. They don't know what's going on. They start running away. There's this crazy battle. And then all the other men that left, they start coming. They start pursuing Midian as they're running away. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan. And they captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, so they killed him at his own place, one of the Midian kings. And Zeb, they killed him at the winepress of Zeb. They killed him in his hometown too. Remember, after the 300, all the other men, he sent out messengers to Ephraim. That's the other half tribe of Ephraim. That's the brother tribe, right? They were both Ephraim and Manasseh were the sons of Joseph. But Israel ended up blessing both of them and giving them Joseph's portion. And so they killed Oreb, they killed Zeb at his hometown, and they pursued Midian, and they brought their heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. So they're fighting back. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" So now Ephraim was proud. Ephraim is mad at Gideon. He's like, "Hey, why didn't you call us to come fight?" And so they're upset with him. And they curse him fiercely. So they're really upset because now all the glory is going to Gideon and Ephraim's not getting any glory. And he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you?" He goes, "Is not gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than all the grapes and harvest of Abiezer?" Right, that's his family. "God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger against him subsided when he said this. So Gideon could have got mad and been like, well, I did all this, but then they would have started this fight. But Gideon, what he says is he comes in, and we kind of got to think about this own relationship. When somebody comes to you, an easy way is to just say, "Hey, just to calm the situation down and be like, who am I to you? You have done all he's like, you have done all these great things. You're the ones that got all the kings. You're the ones that did all this thing." And then like, "Oh, okay." Then it kind of ease up. There's Proverbs about that. I forgot exactly how it goes, but it's when a wrathful tongue comes at you, if you come in with loving kindness, the wrath will subside. So then here, we're almost done here. And Gideon came to Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. So they're still pursuing some of the Midian kings. So he said to the men in Succoth, "Please give us loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted. And I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And so they're tired. They're trying to get these kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, and they go to the town of Succoth. And so this would have been, I think, the tribes of Gad and Dan and Succoth. And so he's down there, and these are Israelites. These are part of the northern tribes. And he asked them for help. And so let's see what happens. This is Judges 8:6. "And the officials of Succoth said, 'Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand? The heads of,'" it says the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, "that we should give bread to your army?" So Gideon said, "Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will flay your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with the briars." And from there he went up to Peniel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Peniel answered him as well, and as same as the men of Succoth has answered. And he said to the men of Peniel, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. So these people were scared. They were scared of the Midianites. They say, I'm not going to help you because if you guys lose, we're going to get it from there. And he's like, well, if you ain't going to give it to us, I'm going to come back and your heads are going to be I'm going to be looking for your heads, not for the Midianites. I'm going to have revenge on you. And so this is where it kind of gets a little shaky for Gideon. Things are starting to kind of go downhill here. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Conqueror with the army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east. For there had fallen 120,000. So it was 120,000, 300 men against 120,000. This had to have been a God thing. And there was still 15,000 men. 300 men were still pursuing 15,000 men. And so these 15,000 men, they were the army of the people of the east, right? And so it says here, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jogbehah and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them, and he captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw the army into a panic. So he gets in there and he gets the kings, right? He doesn't have to defeat all 15,000. He gets the kings. So now all the other 15,000, they're into a panic. So they're gone. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Ares, and he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he goes, about whom you taunted me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give you bread? Remember, they said, we're not going to give you bread, even though you're exhausted, because you don't have these kings yet. He stops, he finds a young man of Succoth, he questions him, he gets all the leaders of all of Succoth, then he goes back and he says, here they are. And then what did he say? He said he was going to flay them with briars. He's going to kill them. And he took the elders of the city, and he took the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. So he killed all the leaders for not helping him. And these were fellow Israelites, but he killed them. As I said, things are starting to get a little bit shaky here. Not that they were in the right or the wrong, but it starts becoming where he's fighting against his own people. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? They answered, as you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, they were my brothers, the son of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not have killed you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, arise and kill him. So he says, where are these? He's asking for his brothers. Where are those men that you killed at Tabor? And they said, well, we thought they were all the son of a king. We didn't know they were your brothers. And he's all, well, if you would have saved them, I wouldn't have killed you. So now he gets his oldest son. Gideon gets his oldest son, and he tells his oldest son, rise and kill him. And so the reason he does that is because the kings to be killed by a little boy is very disrespectful. They would rather be killed by a great leader named Gideon. But Gideon says, you don't even deserve that. I'm going to have my firstborn, this boy. I'm going to have this boy kill you. And so, but the young man did not draw a sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. He could have been as young as 13, maybe even 12 or 11, and he told him to kill these. But he couldn't. He was too young. He just couldn't do it. And so then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Check this out real quick. I'm sorry I'm keeping you so long. It's just like a Bible study. You guys, you ain't even been here for an hour. Just try to keep your eyes open for a little bit here. All right. And it's not even an hour. Don't expect your kids to stay awake in school if you can't stay awake in church, right? Just think about that. And so here he killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of the camels. What do you see on top of the mosques? Crescent moon, right? You see a crescent moon. And these crescent ornaments, and the Midianites, what they did is they worshiped the Al-Ilal, which become Allah. It's the moon god. And so the moon god was also worshipped. This comes from Sumeria, and it comes all the way down to the Canaanites. It comes all the way from all of them worship this moon god. God was Sin. His name was Sin. Not that it had anything to do with the Hebrew sin, the word sin, but it was. You look up the god Sin. It was the moon god. And so Al-Ilal is what this crescent moon. They were wearing the ornament of their gods. And so now the ornament of their gods, he took these crescent ornaments. And so now today, Al-Ilal, the moon god, has become who do what is it? What are the I don't want to say Arabs, but what are the Middle East? What are they? Allah. Who's the god Allah? Who worships Allah? Islam. There you go. Thank you, Scott. I knew you had it in you. I know. I wasn't being very clear. I was being very, very, very hard. But Islam is they worship Allah. And Muhammad came along. They have taken Allah and they've made him this God of Abraham, but he was never the God of Abraham.